Hi Year 9, welcome back. It's me, Mrs. Kahoot. This is lesson 2 for you. I know I cut out at the end of last week's lesson. It was just me saying goodbye, so don't panic. But I've got a timer on this week, so hopefully I will not get cut off and that won't confuse you. I hope you got on okay with learning the functions of the skeleton and being able to label the bones. If you're still unsure about that topic, you can always go back and re-watch the video if you struggle to get some of the facts right and be able to memorise them. But moving on, this week we're going to look at joints in particular, which is, as you can see on the screen, a place where two or more bones meet. Now, joints are really important in our body because they allow us to perform that function of movement. If you remember, movement is one of the functions of the skeleton. There are two main types of joints that you need to learn if you were going to go and study, well, you need to know for your GCSE course, rather, your Year 9, duh. So I'm going to go through those, and then there are certain movements that can occur around a joint. So each joint is made up slightly different in a slightly different way, and obviously the movements that can occur at them are not always the same. So you have more than these two types of joints in your body, but these two joints that we're going to look at today are associated with movement, and they're known as something called a synovial joint. Now that's because, again, it allows movement. So synovial joint is just a joint where it allows movement to take place. So here in the picture it's just showing you an ankle joint. So we're going to move along when my laptop catches up. Being very slow today. Come on. Does not want to play ball. Let me just see what I can get it to do. Okay, so the first type of joint we are going to look at is a hinge joint. Now you will see in the three images above, they show you some examples of a hinge joint. So this is obviously not talking about the human body, we're talking about a door. So that's why we refer to the hinge on the door, the bit of the door that allows the movement, as the hinge, because it replicates this same joint that you find in the body. Now we find a hinge joint in two main places. That is the knee, as shown here, and your elbow, as shown here. So, God, it's being so slow. So, the movement that can occur at a hinge joint is known as flexion and extension. So here in this image, you'll see that at the knee joint there is flexion. So this is as if when the knee is bent, so when the joint is bent. Here at this knee joint, you can see we have extension. So the angle around the joint, bit of math for you, is extended here, whereas the angle around the joint here is smaller. Okay, so the angle's been increased, the angle around the joint has been decreased. So this is flexion and this is extension, and then the same in the elbow. So you can see here at the elbow joint, there is extension, so the arms are extended. And as they pull back on this oar on the boat, flexion will occur. So it's essentially the bending and straightening around the joint. So these joints are extremely powerful actually, and they can really help with speed. So you can see here in the 100-meter race and here in a rowing race. So just like I said earlier, flexion is the decreasing of the angle around the joint, so bending. And here you can see you've got an example of flexion here at the elbow, flexion here at the elbow, and here and here. And then extension, so is increasing the angle of joint, straightening the joint. So in case you don't know who this guy is, Roger Federer, and you can see he's got extension at his elbow joint as he performs that forehand shot. In case you didn't know, this sport that's being played here is actually called handball. We do quite a bit of that we do a whole unit of that in practical, so you'll get a chance to have a go. Moving on then, second type of synovial joint that you need to know is the ball and socket joint. Again, it's formed slightly different, so it's different to the hinge joint. Here you can see one part of the bone has a rounded head, and the bit of bone that it's going into has almost disc shape, so they fit together really well, almost like a jigsaw piece. So this is the ball part, and then this is the socket part of the joint. So like I say, fits inside the cup shape end of the bone. So A ball and socket joint actually allows for a lot more movement to occur. And they're the most mobile joints in your body. So in case you haven't already thought of where you might find them, you find them in your shoulder, and you can also find them in your hips. Now, why are they important in sport? So most sports require some type of hip movement or shoulder movement. And it's important that the joint that connects bones together here allows for that full range. That's why you'll find that it's a ball and socket joint. Now let's think about what movements can actually occur. So just like when we've talked about a hinge joint, flexion and extension can occur. Now this is the increasing and decreasing of the angle of the joint. Now that's quite confusing to understand when it's quite simple when we talk about the elbow joint. You basically bend your arms up and you've got flexion, and you extend your lower arm down and you've got extension. With flexion and extension at the ball and socket joint, in order for it to be flexion at your shoulder, you would raise your arm up, and then for extension you would pull your arm or shoulder joint almost like back behind you. Or if you were going to throw a ball or a javelin, for example, and you start with your arm further back and then throw it forward. Obviously flexion and extension at the hip is quite simple. You know, you bend forward as if you're going to touch your toes, and you've got flexion, and you stand up straight and you've got extension at your hip. That would work with your bending to the side as well. Now moving on then, two new movements we haven't talked about yet. Abduction and adduction. So this is increasing and decreasing the limbs towards or out from the body. So if you look at this diagram here, so if this person was to put their arm out to the side, that would be abduction. So taking that arm away from the middle line of the body. If they were to bring their arms back in, so their arm down towards their side, that is adduction. So adding back to the midline of the body. Best way to remember it is that ab is obviously taking away, and add, if you add something back, you're adding back to the midline of your body. If you look here, you'll see some examples. So adduction, sideways moving a limb towards the midline of the body. So for example, a star jump, so a jump in after you've jumped out would be adduction. And obviously if you jump out to do a star jump, you've got abduction at your shoulder and your hip joint. Here you can see obviously this person, they've got their leg out to the side here, so they've got abduction at their hip. They're taking away from what would be the middle line of their body. This person's playing beach volleyball. You do have another two movements that can occur at your hip and shoulder joint, and these are rotation and circumduction. So they're slightly different. So here you've got rotation at the shoulder, and then here you've got circumduction as they go all the way around to bowl the cricket ball. So the joint moves in a circular motion, for example, service action or bowling action. Now the slight difference, like I say, is rotation is just rotating that joint out, whereas circumduction is where you would take the movement all the way around the joint. This person, in case you didn't know, is playing water polo. Okay, so we need to just, before we finish, look at the structure of a synovial joint. That's one of your facts that you need to learn. So these two joints, hinge and ball and socket, although they are different and allow different movements to occur at them, they are both known as synovial joints, and they both have the same components, which is why we put them in that category. So you've got synovial joints, which joints that allow movement, and then hinge joint and ball and socket joint are subcategories from that. So each one of these joints has cartilage. Now the role of the cartilage is to stop those bones rubbing together and provide a bit of shock absorption. So in your knees you'll find like quite a high level of cartilage because, for example, those joints take a lot of weight and absorb a lot of shock when you're walking, jumping, running, things like that. Synovial fluid then, links to the name, it lubricates the joints. So you have a small capsule inside the joint, which when you start moving and using those joints more, it will slowly release that fluid. It just helps to keep those joints supple, keep them moving freely without any sort of issues or risk of injury. So lubricates the joints, just like if you had a squeaky door, you'd put a bit of oil on it to stop it squeaking. And then the last thing we're going to look at is ligaments and tendons. So these are really, really important. Ligaments link bones together. So where the joint is and where you've got two bones coming together, you need to have a ligament that holds them in place. It keeps that joint really, really stable and is going to reduce your risk of injuries like dislocation. Now, exercise can strengthen ligaments and tendons. We want them strong, but we also want them stretchy. So it's seems kind of wrong to say you want something strong and stretchy at the same time, but you do, and that is achievable through exercise. And then the last thing is a tendon. So tendon connects the muscle to the bone. Now, you need muscle to be attached to the bone in order for movement to occur. And next week we're going to look at muscular system in more detail and how those muscles allow movement to happen, basically through contraction and relaxation. So they contract and get shorter, which pulls against a bone to allow that movement to happen around the joint. If you go through in terms of what you need to learn this week, you have got your facts to learn about 2 different types of joints. You also need to know all the movements and the movements that can occur at each joint. So if you're confused, you just need to go back through this video and have another watch. And you also need to know these components. So you've got essentially 3 things to learn this week. My advice to you is to think about your sport, think about the skills and the movements that occur in your sport, and what type of joints are you using when you perform that skill. So for example, when you kick a football, what joint is the movement occurring at, and what type of movement is it? Is it flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, rotation, circumduction? In order to gain better marks, in order to show that you have a higher level of understanding around this topic for GCSE PE, you need to be able to say, in this sport, during this skill, this is where the movement is happening, these are the type of movements that are happening. And then next week we'll be able to take it to the next level, and you'll be able to tell me what muscles are allowing that movement to happen. So I know these lessons seem like quite a lot of information crammed into one, which is why you might want to watch them more than once. Obviously, you have a set task this week to draw your diagram of a synovial joint, but you can also do additional tasks. It depends how hard you want to work, it depends how into this subject you are, it depends how you're coping at home with everything else that is going on in the world. So you're doing really well so far, just by in the sense of by the fact that you're just watching or listening to this clip. This short lesson just means that you're already doing enough. And you know, if you've not managed to do much from last week, or you're struggling to remember, don't panic. It isn't the end of the world. Yeah, these aren't going anywhere. You've got time to drip feed yourself that information over the summer if you want to go back to it. There is no pressure on anyone. There is no rush. Nobody is going to be behind in learning. I will catch you up. It will be fine. I'm a pro at this. I know what I'm doing, guys. We'll be fine. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and next week will be muscular system. So, like I say, have a go at learning some of the facts, have a go at the task, see how you get on. Take care. Bye.